Hello and welcome to Ben Ross's Conservatorium of Audio. I'm Ben Rosser, and today we're going to be taking a look at iZotope Ozone 4. Ozone 4 is quite a good plug-in, whether you're looking at bringing out that extra bit of tone and character in an individual sound, or if you're looking at mastering a whole track. There's many powerful features to enable you to get the perfect sound. From the multi-band system to the mid-side system to all of the different effects modules that come with Ozone 4, there's many different ways to get the sound you're after. This tutorial is looking at the more advanced features available in iZotope Ozone 4. It follows on from our freely available Introduction to iZotope Ozone 4 tutorial, which is available on our website, conservatoriumofaudio.com, as you can see the address at the bottom of the screen there. So we're going to start by having a look at some individual sounds and see what we can get Ozone to do for those, and then we're going to look at mastering some whole tracks, and we're going to look at a variety of different material, so you'll get to see how it affects acoustic stuff separately to electronic stuff, harder stuff as opposed to softer stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab hold of a sample and chuck iZotope Ozone 4 on that one. So we've just got Ozone 4 set up on an audio channel in Ableton Live 8 at the moment, and we're just going to grab hold of a bit of a lead sound. Something fairly interesting there, so we'll just chuck that on the audio channel and we'll give that one a play. So what we'll be looking at doing to this sound is just bringing out some of the bitiness, some of the airiness and space, and just making it that bit larger and a bit more solid than it currently is. So to start off with, we're just going to go into our presets, and we're going to go for one of our instrument and buses presets. Just find one that sounds like it might fit okay. We might go for this vocals with EQ dynamics, reverb and tape saturation. And just click OK on that one. And firstly we'll just bypass Ozone, and we'll play that sound, and then we'll hear what it sounds like unbypassed with Ozone affecting the sound. And if we start the Ozone processing, you can notice straight away that it's a lot more punchy, a lot more full, and has that extra bit of air to it as soon as we bring Ozone in and start processing the sound. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go through our different modules and see if we can give this sound a bit more character and see what else Ozone can do for it. So we're going to start by modifying our EQ. We're just going to open up a couple of extra EQ bands, and we're going to add a couple of boosts just to help bring out some of the bitiness of the sound, and just to help bring out some of the presence of the sound up in the 5 to 8K region there. We're also going to turn on our multi-band stereo imaging module, and we're just going to add some extra width to the high mids and the high frequencies of the sound. We're also going to lower our low frequency band, which will help pull all of the bass frequencies to the middle of the stereo spectrum, help make them that little bit more solid and have that extra bit of body to them. So we'll just hear how that sounds. We'll start with that bypassed. And if we unbypass that, now, as we might have heard just then, there's a little bit too much reverb happening on that signal, so we'll just go into our mastering reverb and just turn down the wet control a little bit. We'll also widen up that reverb and just add a bit more room size to it, and we'll see how that one sounds. As you can see, it's just made the sound that little bit more solid and stopped it having that fluttery sort of sound up around the higher frequencies. So next, going into our loudness maximizer, we're just going to apply a bit of maximization and see how much louder we can get this sound to be. As you can see, we can push that fairly hard before we're starting to get distortion. So currently using the brick wall maximizer mode, which is quite a strong sort of effect and will affect the sound quite harshly. But when you're dealing with a sound that's got a gritty, sort of bitey sort of feel like the one that we're working with, that can sometimes be quite a good thing. So now that we've had a bit of a play with our EQ, our reverb, our maximizer and our stereo imaging, we might just go into our harmonic exciter. Again, making use of the multiple bands, we're just going to add a bit more excitement to the higher frequencies, a little bit more to the high mids, and we'll see how that one sounds. So as you can hear, when working with a lead sound like the one that we're working with at the moment, Ozone can really get it to jump out of the mix and have that life of its own that it didn't have before. So again, we'll just bypass Ozone and we'll play that sound again. So as you can see, quite a lot louder, quite a lot fuller, quite a lot more solid, and yet it still has that extra bit of air and space that it didn't have previously. So the next sound we're going to be looking at is a bit more of a bass sound, and we'll see what sort of a tone we can get out of that one with Ozone. And then we're going to move on to a bit of a full drum mix and see what we can get happening with that one. So we'll just return Ozone to the default preset in preparation for our next sound. We're just going to delete the lead sound that we were working with, and we'll find our bass sound. This one sounds pretty interesting. We might see what we can do with that one. So quite a deep bass sound, but it does have a little bit of higher frequency content there as well. So let's have a play with that one and see what we can get Ozone to do. So instead of starting with a preset this time, we're going to just start with the default preset and we'll see what sort of a sound we can get happening. Just preserve some of that nice bass end. Bring out some of the bitiness. And just bring out some of that tubbiness. And just bring out some of that tubbiness there. Also, because it's a bass sound and there's not much happening in the high frequencies, we might actually just bring up our EQ info and I'm just going to put that low pass on the mix like so. Just so that anything up in the top end is not going to end up interfering. So next we're going to add a bit of mastering reverb, but we're going to make sure that that's not affecting the bass frequencies and muddying those up. So to enable us to do that, we'll just grab hold of this slider. We're going to bring that up to about 300 Hertz, just so that it's only affecting everything between 300 Hertz and 7 kilohertz, as we can see there. So you can see adding that interesting bit of space in there. The next thing we're going to do is grab hold of our multi-band harmonic exciter, and we're just going to adjust our multi-band system to suit the frequencies that we're working with this sound. So we'll go from about 7.3K to 20K. We'll go from about 1K to 7.3K, and we'll make our lower bands 20 to 150 Hertz and 150 to 1 kilohertz. So that way we can work on each of those specific bands individually and see how we can get those to affect the sound. Just bring up the amount of the third band a bit more than the fourth band, because it's got the bitiness, and it will help bring out some of the extra character of the sound by pushing that one a little bit more than the rest. Also going to apply some multi-band dynamics. As we can see, all of the multi-band modules are all making use of the same multi-band frequencies, so whatever adjustments we make with one of those, we're making with the other ones as well. So starting with our low frequency band, we're just going to add a little bit of compression to that. Not too much, just enough to help solidify it a little bit. Next we'll go to our low mids, and we're just going to do something fairly similar with that one. Onto our high mids. Again, just turn the ratio up a little bit and bring down the threshold. One of the other things that's also quite handy is to turn on auto gain compensation, as this will mean that the gain that's lost through compression or limiting is automatically made up for by Ozone. So as you can hear there's quite a lot more solid with the dynamics processing. If we turn the dynamics off, you can see it does have a bit more air, but it's not quite as solid as soon as we bring the dynamics back in. It's a lot more beefy, has that extra bit of solidity to it. So I'm going to add a bit of stereo imaging to this one, using a similar technique as what we did with the harmonic exciter, a bit more in the upper mids than the other bands. And again, like the previous sound, we're just going to bring down the low frequency band, help bring the lower frequencies into the center of the stereo image. Again, just helps to add that extra bit of solidity and punch to the low frequencies. And finally, to add a bit more volume to that sound, we're just going to go into our loudness maximizer. We'll go for the Intelligent 2 maximization mode. We want something fairly transparent, so we'll opt for the transparent character there. And there we have our sound. So if we play that one bypassed so that you can hear what it sounded like to start off with. Compared to what we've now got. So the next sound that we're going to be looking at is a bit of a drum sound made up of a few different audio loops, and basically we're going to treat it like a drum group channel. So going to be affecting all of the drum sound as a whole, and we'll see what sort of stuff Ozone can do for us in that situation. So we've got our drum sound all set up and ready to go. Basically we've just got 3 audio channels set up in live, each with a different audio loop, all feeding into a group channel, and we've got Ozone 4 set up on that group channel. So I'll play the sounds individually so that you can hear what the drum sound's made up of. Firstly, we've got some China cymbals. Followed by the main body of the drum sound. Just some interesting percussion instruments in there. And then finally for our low end we've got some timpanis. So if we play that sound all together. So basically what we'll be aiming to do with this sound is just give it a bit more space, a bit more air, give it a bit more depth, and generally make it that little bit bigger. So again, we'll just open up our copy of Ozone 4. And we're just going with the default preset again. And we'll start by adding some paragraphic EQ to that one. Just help bring out some of that clarity of the high end there. Some of the boominess of the timpanis. Take out some of that boxiness there. And just a bit of a boost around the 1 to 2K mark, where the top end of the timpanis are really speaking through. Onto our mastering reverb. Now we're going to make use of the mid-side mode with the reverb, which allows us to apply reverb to the middle of the stereo spectrum separately to the sides of the stereo spectrum. So one of the handy tricks that I like to use with the mid-side mode is to add more reverb to the sides than to the middle, and you tend to get a really nice airy, spacious sort of effect. You can also bypass or solo the mid and side sections independently when you're in mid-side mode, and you'll find there's 4 effects modules that make use of the mid-side mode in Ozone, which is the paragraphic EQ, the mastering reverb, the harmonic exciter, and the multiband dynamics. So we'll see how the mid-side mode can affect the other modules a little bit later, and for the moment we'll just get stuck into putting some reverb on this drum sound. So as we said, a bit more on the sides than on the middle, as we can see. We'll just solo the middle so you can hear that one for the moment. So you can hear what sort of an effect the reverb has on the mids. And do the same thing with the sides. So as you can see, you can get away with pushing the sides a whole heap more than the mids, and as a result you get this sort of effect. A big, spacious, sort of airy sound, but because you're not putting too much on the mids, you're still getting the nice, clear sort of sounds coming from the middle of the stereo spectrum. So moving on to our harmonic exciter. Just going to apply a fair bit to those upper frequencies. Just bring down our output volume a little bit, just to prevent the clipping. go for our multi-band dynamics. Again, just going to be adding a little bit of compression to this one, starting with our low frequencies. Again, turning on our auto gain compensation. Just a bit of light compression on our mid-range frequencies. And finally, our upper frequencies. Also going to add a bit of expander to the upper frequencies, just so that when they're extremely quiet, they just cut out that little bit better. Just helps give you a clearer sound when the sound tails off. So we're now going to add some loudness maximizer to that one. I'm going to go for our soft mode, a fairly fast release. And although there's plenty of headroom in Ozone for you to apply processing to the sound, I do recommend making sure that you're not clipping the output too much, as you can end up getting a bit of bad sound out of it. So if you need to bring down the output gain or the input gain in order to make sure that you've got the headroom that you need to work with in Ozone, then go ahead and do that, as it will help give you that bit of better quality result. So the final thing we're going to do to add to this one is just a bit of multiband stereo imaging. Again, we're going to bring out the higher frequencies a bit more than we're bringing out the mids and the lows, turning down the lows to bring the bass into the center of the stereo image. There is another technique for doing that, which we'll get into when we start looking at the tracks in a little bit. But at the moment, just turning down the widening on the bass band will have the same effect for us. So we'll hear how that one sounds. Just helping to open up the higher frequencies and give them a bit more space and depth. So if we bypass that one so you can hear the original sound, it's a lot more dull and has a lot less life than when Ozone's processing it. Also has a very defined space with the processing that it wasn't getting previous. So that's a bit of an example of what Ozone can do for your typical drum sound. So we're now going to look at mastering some whole tracks, the first track of which is just a simple electronic track that I produced a while ago, and we're just going to run that one through Ozone and see what it can do for us. So I've just got Ozone again set up on an audio channel in Ableton Live, just got our audio clip set up on that same channel, as you can see there, and we're just going to bring down the volume of that clip a little bit just to give us a bit of extra headroom when we go to apply the processing in Ozone. There's two main ways to approach the mastering process. You can either do it the more traditional way like this, where you bounce down a WAV file of the session that you want mastered, and then you load that up into a new session and apply the mastering to it. That can be quite handy, especially if you don't have a ton of CPU power, as Ozone can be a little bit CPU intensive sometimes, so it can allow you to have more CPU available for your mastering plugins, as opposed to having to run them alongside all of the other plugins you're using for the production. The disadvantage is that if you do the mastering along with the mixing, with your mastering plugins just just applied to the master channel of the set that you're working on, you can actually tune the mix and the mastering processes to suit one another, rather than just having to make sure that the mastering process is tuned to suit the mix, as we have to do in this case. So there's a couple of different approaches. Just depends on how you feel you're going to get the best results for yourself, as well as what your computer's capable of. So for these first two tracks, we're going to be mastering the more traditional way, and then for the third track that we're going to be looking at, we will actually be opening up the original mix session for that, and we're going to be mastering straight from that. So any adjustments we need to make to the mix to suit the master are all quite easy to do. So for this simple electronic track, we're just going to find ourselves a preset and go into our genre-specific mastering, and we might go for the Electro and Dance Rock Master EQ and Exciter Boost. We'll just click OK on that one. We'll just bypass the processing for the moment, just so that you can have a bit of a listen to the track, and then we'll hear what it sounds like with that preset. So as you can hear, it's a fairly simple track. So what we're going to be aiming to do is bringing out some of that air and space, give it that extra bit of depth, and help bring out that really nice bass that it's got happening. So we'll just hear it with this preset, and then we'll go from there. So as you can hear, just by the application of a simple preset, get a much better, much stronger sound out of it. So we'll now go and have a bit of a play with this preset and see what else we can get it to do for us. So I just want to bring out some more of that airy top end. We might take out some of the tubbiness around 500 Hertz. And we might also just widen up this boost here so it's affecting more of the high mids and the higher frequencies, just to add that extra bit of clarity to the sound. We're also going to apply some mastering reverb to this one, again opting to use our mid-side technique, so more on the sides than on the middle. We'll see how that one sounds. So if we bypass that reverb, and then if we add that reverb back in, it's just adding that interesting bit of space just on the sides. As opposed to the little bit that we're putting on the mids. Nextly, we're just going to go in and have a look at our loudness maximizer settings. They sound pretty good for the moment. We're using the Intelligent 2 mode, using a fast and loud character, which suits the different feel of the instruments in the track. And we might just bring the threshold down a little bit and see if we can get that little bit more volume out of it. So as you can see, you can get a little bit more out of it, but as soon as you start to push it too far, you do get that bit of distortion. So moving on to our harmonic exciter, we're also going to be using this one in mid-side mode. So what we're going to be doing is adding extra excitement to the sides than we are to the mids. Again, opting to push the higher frequencies more than we're pushing the mids and the lows. So just go into our mid mode, and we'll just add a little bit, but not as much as we're adding for the sides. And we'll see how that one sounds. One of the other things that is quite handy to note, regardless of whether or not you're dealing with a whole mix or an individual sound, is to know which audio modules are running in, which you can bring up just by clicking that graph button there, as you can see. So we can see at the moment that the exciter, which is part of the multiband system, is currently sitting after the reverb. What I'd like is to be actually adding the reverb to the excited sound. So what we can do is we can just grab hold of that reverb module, and we'll just set that one between the channel ops and the loudness maximizer, just so that anything we do with the exciter and the stereo imaging is then going to be affected also by the reverb. So we'll just click OK on that one, and we'll see how that sounds now. As you can see, it's just got that extra bit of sparkliness in the very high end there. So just going into our multiband stereo imaging, again we're just going to widen up the mids and the high frequencies, bring down the low frequencies a little bit, and finally we're just going to go into our dynamics. As we can see, we've got a little bit of compression being applied across all three bands. We might just bring the threshold of this mid band down a little bit. And just to add a bit more ratio, a bit more threshold to the high frequencies, just to get those really to jump out that little bit more. So if we play that with Ozone bypass, so you can hear the original sound. Sounds rather small and thin, doesn't have a huge amount of life to it, but as soon as we bring the processing in from Ozone, one of the other things to also note about our modification to the order of the different effects modules is that by putting the reverb after the dynamics, the reverb tends to have a much softer sound, whereas if we had it where it was previously, it would then be getting compressed by the multiband dynamic system, which would accentuate various elements of the reverb, but would give it a more harsh and take away from some of the softness of the sound that we're getting from it now. So we'll just move that one back to where it was. You can move any of these modules around to suit the order that you need them to be in, with the exception that the three multiband modules can only be moved within this multiband block here. So we're now going to move on to a bit of an acoustic recording. It's got some acoustic guitar, some acoustic vocals, as well as some drums and some congas that have been done up in Ableton with some samples. So this next track that we're looking at is a track that I helped record not long ago. It's written by one of my friends, Johnny Post, part of his solo project, which you can check out at johnnypost.conservatoriumofaudio.com. It's a little bit of an acoustic ballad sort of track. It's not quite finished yet. You may hear some glitchy sort of stuff in the vocals, stuff that's not quite perfect yet. However, we've still got to get the production and the mixing and the mastering finished for this one. So we're lucky that we're getting to hear it in its semi-finished form, and it'll give you a bit of an idea of how Ozone can affect a more acoustic live sort of recording. So we've used multiple different takes of the guitars with multiple different mic techniques to get a big spacious stereo guitar sound, and we've also used multiple different takes of the vocal in order to get a larger vocal sound. And we're currently just running that with what we were using as our click track, which is just some sampled congas and a sampled drum beat. So what we're going to be aiming to do is just to add a bit more life to it, a bit more space to it, and just get it to jump out that little bit more. So we'll start by playing that track so you can hear what it sounds like. So what we're going to be looking at doing to this track is just adding that extra bit of life and air to it, helping it to jump out that little bit more, helping the vocal to have that bit more presence, and also helping to retain some of the oomph in the low end where the kick drum is. So in order to do all of that stuff, we're going to actually use the mid-side mode in our paragraphic equalizer, so that we can adjust the frequency spectrum of the middle of the stereo spectrum separately to the sides. So we're just going to go into our mid mode for the moment, and we'll just play that one. Let's bring out some of that air. Bit of a boost around 5K for a bit of extra clarity. Bit of a boost around 1K to help the vocal jump out that little bit more in the middle. Let's take out some of that boxiness. Now what we're going to be looking at doing in our side mode is just bringing out some more of the higher frequencies, just to help make the sides that bit more spacious. We're also going to add a higher up boost to the vocal to help the vocal sitting in the sides of the stereo spectrum to jump out that little bit more also. We're just going to pull down that section around 4K a little bit, just to let the center of the stereo image have that bit. We're just going to add a little bit of cut at the same place that we've boosted in the low end, which is our other method for bringing the bass frequencies back into the middle, is to use the mid-side mode in the paragraphic equalizer to boost the mids and to cut the sides, and that way you'll find that you'll get a lot less phasing and a lot more clarity down in your low end, which can be quite handy. And we're also going to add a little bit of a boost around the mid section that we cut in the mid mode. So we'll just hear how that sounds. So if we bypass that one, you can hear it sounds a lot thinner, doesn't have quite as much body and fullness as it does with the new EQ. So if we unbypass that one, you can hear how much better the sound has just become just by using the mid-side parametric EQ. So again, we're going to move on to a bit of mastering reverb. I'm going to use the mid-side mode again with this one. So just solo our mids for the moment. And just going to add quite a bit to our sides. Just bring our mids back down. We're just going to add more pre-delay to the sides than we did with the mids, again to help expand the sides that little bit more. We're also going to just adjust the reverb so that it's not affecting the frequencies below about 200 Hz. Just help to retain some of the clarity in the low end. So the next thing we're going to do is add a bit of loudness maximizer. We're going to go for a transparent character, use the intelligent mode, and we'll just get a bit more volume out of that track. As you can hear with the maximizer, there tends to be a nice sweet spot with the threshold where you'll be getting the best possible sounds. If you go too little, it tends to sound too weak, and when you push too hard, you tend to start to lose the high frequencies. And as you can hear there, you start to get a bit of distortion happening. So if we go about minus 4.6, we're pushing it just that little bit, but not too much. Also going to add some multi-band harmonic excitement. And again, we're just going to use the mid-side mode with this one. Add a fair bit more excitement to the high frequency band than the lower bands. And we're just going to add that little bit more to the sides than we did with the mids. And we'll see how that sounds. Just balance those ones out a little bit. Next, we're going to add some multi-band dynamics. Starting with our lower frequencies, just going to apply some compression to that. With the auto band compensation turned on. Now I've opted to add a decent bit more compression to the very high frequencies, just to help bring them out a little bit more. We've added slightly less to the 2 to 10k region, but still adding that bit of compression to help bring the vocal and the upper end of the guitar out. Only a little bit in the mid-range. We only want it touching that one a little bit, and not too much on the bass either, as otherwise we tend to find the kick drum getting lost. When you're using multi-band dynamics, it's very important when you're adjusting one band to not only listen to how that band is being adjusted, but how it's being adjusted relative to the other bands and what is moving in or out of the other bands as a result to what you're doing to the one you're working with. So the multi-band dynamics is probably the hardest module to get your head around, but if you start to think of it as just 4 separate bands, each one with its own limiting compression and expansion, then things start to become a lot more easier. If you are finding that you're starting to lose some of the frequencies on the band that you're compressing or limiting, you can also choose to adjust the attack and release settings by clicking the show or hide button there. So for example, just to retain that kick a little bit more, we might just bring the attack of the limiter and the compression up, just so that it's not having so much of a severe impact on those parts of the sound. So we're also going to just bring in the limiter for the bass and for the mid-range frequencies, just so that they're not going to be pushing too hard, so that whenever they're really starting to peak, they sort of pull back a little bit and allow the vocal and the upper end to speak out that little bit more. So we'll just hear how that one sounds. We're just going to go into our stereo imaging. We're going to actually pull down those 2 upper bands a little bit, push up the mids, and pull back the bass a little bit. This is just going to help to pull the sound together a bit more coherently than it is, considering all of the additional space we've added using the EQ, the reverb, and the harmonic exciter. So we'll just hear how that one sounds. This track also serves as quite a good example of how it can be difficult to get the mixing perfect to suit how the mastering process has to happen. As you can hear, the congas were mixed slightly too loud, and as a result, it pretty much doesn't matter what I do with the mastering process, I can't actually fix that. So it's always imperative to get things right in the mix to start off with, or use the technique we're going to show you with the next track, where you actually master during the mixing process and you can then tune one to suit the other, which is quite handy. So that's how Ozone can affect an acoustic track, and feel free to make use of the mid-side mode in all of the different areas, because as you can see, it just allows you that much more control over what you're doing with the sound, and especially the stereo width and the space that you can get out of the sound. So I'd recommend having a play with those. and we'll get stuck into our next track. So the last bit of audio that we're going to be looking at is a set that's been done up by a friend of mine, Drain Damage. He's done this one for it to be played in a club. It contains a few of his different tracks and goes through a few different styles of music. So what we'll do first is we'll just have a bit of a listen to some of those and hear how the different elements sound. This is a good example of how to master something that is a decent bit heavier. So if you're into metal or breaks or drum and bass or something like that, then this is a good example for you to listen to.
The true source of man's inhumanity to man. His ability to feel.
So that's an example of some of the stuff in the start of the set. If we move a bit further along,
Satanism is freedom.
again moving a bit further along into the third quarter of the set. And finally into the end of the set where Drain Damage goes for a bit more of a heavy metal sort of feel.
In the right hands it could be held up to distant men and make their blood boil. This gun symbolizes anarchy, violent overthrow, a change in the world order.
So as you can hear, quite a few different tones, quite a few different elements, and quite a few different feels that he's got happening through various parts of the set. If you're more interested in that sort of music, then I'd recommend checking out Drain Damage's MySpace page, or you can check out his Sonic Palette studio page at sonicpalette.conservatoriumofaudio.com. And if you want to get in contact with Drain Damage, you'll normally find him huddled behind the glow of an LCD monitor in Sonic Palette Studio, producing the very same sort of stuff that you've heard just now. So what we've done, we've just got this set open in Ableton Live 8, and we've just gone and put Ozone 4 on the master channel. We put it after the additional effects that Drain Damage had put on there. As you can see, he's got an auto filter, which is automated to manipulate everything that's going through the master channel at a couple of points in this track. So we'll just enable Ozone, just bring up the user interface. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to start again with a default preset. Go to our paragraphic EQ, and we're just going to start with this first track in the set and see what sort of a bit of tone shaping we can do with this. We're not going to do anything too extreme. We're not going to try and get too much more volume out of it. We're just going to try and clear it up a little bit and just get it up to the sort of level it's going to have to be so that he can play it in the club.
His ability to feel.
So as you can see, just some fairly simple EQing there. We're not going to do anything too drastic like using the mid-side mode, as the mix he's provided is already pretty good. So we'll just check a couple of other bits of that track and make sure that EQ's working well. So as you can see, our low end boost is just helping to bring out the solidity of the kick drums in there, just pulling out some of the tubbiness around the 500 Hz mark. Just a bit of a boost at 1K, just because there's a lot of bitey sort of sounds in there, which can tend to really jump out with a bit of 1K boost. And we've also boosted up around the 10K area, fairly broad boost, just to help bring the air and the clarity out of the track. So, a bit of mastering reverb on this one. We're going to go for the plate reverb on this one. Mid-side mode, we're actually going to leave the mid completely dry, and just put a tiny bit on the side, just to help add that extra bit of space for the harmonic exciter and the stereo imaging to work with. So we'll just hear how that sounds.
No matter what you do, I'm gonna hunt you down. I'm gonna hunt you down, and then I'm gonna slit your throat. And then I'm gonna cut you open, and then I'm gonna eat your motherfucking heart. You better pray, Johnny. You better fuck.
So if we just solo the sides, you can hear what it is that we're adding the reverb to. We're just going to make sure it's not affecting any of the lower frequencies there, as opposed to what we can hear through the mids. As you can hear, just getting that nice bit of silky sort of airiness, just with that extra bit of reverb on the sides. So moving on to our loudness maximizer. Again, we're going to go with something that's fairly transparent on this track. Go with the Intelligent 2 mode. Just bring our margin down a tiny bit, and we'll adjust our threshold as we need. So, as we can see, a tiny little bit of threshold, just to bring the volume up that little bit. We don't actually want to start squashing the track at all, though, as Drain Damage has got quite a few articulate dynamics happening. I was given very strict instructions to make sure that we retain those as much as possible. So, I'll do the same thing here for you in this demonstration, so that you can hear that you don't necessarily need to really pump up the volume of a production. One of the main reasons why you will find so much compression and maximization used is because people want stuff to jump out when it's being broadcasted, for example over TV or radio, and that's one of the ways they can really get it to do it. However, if you try doing that with some music that does require a large dynamic, say the acoustic track from Johnny Post we heard just before, or say a piece of classical music, you'll tend to find that it actually detracts from the character of the music. And in those cases, and in this case, that bit of subtleness can actually go a lot further than smashing it. So moving on to our multi-band harmonic exciter, we're just going to add a little bit of excitement. Again, we're not going to add too much to this particular set, as we don't want to detract from the pretty good mix that's already happening. So we'll just hear how that's sounding.
No matter where you go, no matter what you do, I'm gonna hunt you down. I'm gonna hunt you down, and then I'm gonna slit your throat. And then I'm gonna cut you open, and then I'm gonna eat your motherfucking heart. You better pray, Johnny. You better.
So as you can hear, it's really starting to jump out, really starting to get that extra bit of sparkle happening. So we're actually going to avoid using the multi-band dynamics at the moment, just to help retain the natural dynamics that Drain Bamage has put in there. And we're going to move on to our stereo imaging module. We're actually going to add a bit of widening to our mid frequencies and our higher frequencies, a little bit to our top end frequencies, and we're going to leave our bass right where it is, as that's got a fairly solid image for the moment. So we'll just hear that one.
Get on your cock, suck your knees, and pray!
So as you can see, by keeping the very high frequencies under a bit more stereo control than we did with the previous stuff that we've looked at in this tutorial, it has helped to keep some of that club atmosphere and club feel to the sound. So one of those other little techniques that can just help to make it that little bit better. So we're just going to quickly bypass it and go through the different sections again, and then we'll unbypass it so that you can hear what sort of a difference Ozone has made to the sound of the production. So as you can see, it's a bit more dull, doesn't tend to have the air or the top end that it does with Ozone. So we'll just unbypass Ozone and we'll go through those again so that you can hear the difference a bit more clearly.
Still not loud enough. Still not fast enough.
So as you can hear, we've made quite a difference to that sound. Sounds quite a lot more punchier, quite a lot bigger, and quite a lot more in your face. When approaching the mastering of something like this, or any commercial production, there is a few extra tools that I do tend to use alongside Ozone 4. So keep an eye out for our more in-depth mastering specific tutorials that we'll be releasing in the near future. We'll have a couple of free ones and a couple of paid ones showing some of the more advanced techniques, some of the other tools of the trade when you're mastering audio, and some of the other ways that you can really get a lot of extra volume out of the sound. So I hope to see you again in another Ben Ross's Conservatorium of Audio tutorial. Thanks for watching.